I am live. I'm reading Vacation. It is a travel book by Joan Marshall Grant about her trip through France in 1946 with her husband, then Charles. And it's an account of these journeys, and this book was published in 1946. Joan died in 1989 and wrote marvelous books about her fond memories. But we are here in chapter 25, Tweetie Birds. Though I'm not at all adverse to late nights, a sequence of them is apt to be wearing, for Charles always wakes too early, so I agreed when he suggested we should be home by 10 o'clock at the latest. I'd better change, I said, for this suit needs pressing. Nonsense, said Charles. We are only going to walk to some quiet little dump, where no one would notice if you were dressed in a sack. We had heard vaguely that there was a restaurant, the oldest in Paris, somewhere on the quay beyond Notre Dame. We had a mental picture of blackened beams, even hams hanging from the ceiling, certainly dim lights, probably scrubbed wooden tables and straw matting on the floor. We will walk to the Tour Agent, said Charles. It is only about a mile, and the exercise will be good for us. So we walked, and yet further. At the last we found the entrance, which we thought would lead to a sober retreat. Across an impressive hall we were conducted to a lift. Massive gates of wrought iron were ceremoniously opened, and we entered what is in fact one of the most celebrated of restaurants. One end of the long room is a semicircle of glass through which the lights of the river glow like luminous fish in a maritime aquarium. Nearly every woman in that crowded room was an example of the polished elegance of that minority on which the tradition of the French woman's chic is justly founded. My suit in their presence forgot that it bore the honourable label of Digby Morton. My Maxwell walking shoes became instantly covered in mud from a grouse moor. My new blouse was only a rag from Geneva, sad as a faded gardenia. They've got something, I said. You were right to tell me not to bother to change. It would have been quite ineffectual. Got what? Said Charles, deliberately obtuse. Got a lot that I haven't. Did you notice the woman in black with the green feathers on her head? The woman in black with the green feathers on her head? Of course he had, but he pretended not to know what I meant, so I went on. Did you see the look she gave me? She gave her escort when he was tactless enough to let her sit where the lighting was unbecoming. She wanted the window table. Her whole effect was ruined if she was seen from the front instead of in profile. And mark you, right profile at that. He continued to watch the flowering of a concept whose seed had been planted several days earlier when we were in Maxime's. Charles, I said, if you will give me the attention which at the moment you are devoting to your courtin, not, if I may say so, in the least a remarkable wine, I will give you a small dissertation which has the rare quality of admitting my own stupidity. I'm all ears. I have, as you know, been sorry for women who achieved their object by guile. I thought them pitiful, because their males demanded so much effort, and to them a curl displaced was a disaster. I considered them helpless. You might, on occasion, profit by regarding psychology, said Charles. Sometimes your empiricism is not enough. It would appear that you have not been excessively female for a long, considerable time. What about Persia? I remarked with some indignation. You may recall that a mere couple of millennia ago I was such a success in your harem that I was poisoned off by less intelligent candidates. I will now produce an analysis based on that knowledge, as though I knew all your long words. I drew his attention from the canard Frederic, whose carcass was being crushed on our behalf by a nickel-plated press, and indicated a woman who looked as though her waist had undergone some similar preparation. You will observe the figure, I said. She will allow herself to be tempted with delicious morsels like a canary packed at ground steel, but for her no real tuck-in is practical. Nonsense, said Charles. You underrate the female capacity for adaptation. Consider the Edwardian beauties. They seldom missed a course. Lucy Alice had an 18-inch waist until she was over 30 and still rode hard to hounds. Lucy Alice was never a Tweety bird, I said heatedly, for I'm devoted to my mother-in-law, and in my more conceited moments consider I resemble her. If she wants her own way, she gets it by legitimate means. She never pretends to be helpless. Tweety bird is one of your better descriptions, said Charles. Surely there must be Tweety chicks also, for I saw two this morning, a boy and a girl in a little mink coat, with a Tweety poodle to match. What exactly is a Tweety bird? We must be clear in our definition. A woman who has the endurance of a guardsman, the concentration of a scientist, the patience of an invalid, and the wit to conceal it all. For instance, if you were a Tweety bird, my angel, you would rule me without ever letting me guess what you were up to. I should recognize your appearance was as effective as a Tommy gun, and be careful not to incense you to use it against me. Considering that I keep you waiting for 5 minutes, you are liable to go without me. I think that's a little tough, I said feelingly. And how would you like to be taken to dress shows and have me make scenes when a hat wasn't right? Fortunately, to be a competent Tweety bird requires a degree of training which you are too clear and too busy to embark on. When you left me parked in Schiaparelli's this morning, I watched a perfect example of the species being given a final fitting for her wedding dress. I saw her too, poor child. She looked so bored. Poor child! She was perfectly aware of her strengths. Would you say, poor Pompadour, poor Montespan? It is pitiful to be stronger than the king, to rule without having to do the chores. It is more difficult to use power secretly than to fight for it in any obvious way. But it must be such a nuisance, and I think what a defeat it must be to have a cold in the head. A Tweety bird never has anything so solid. At the first sniff, she retreats to her bedroom, where the lighting is carefully subdued. Doctors are summoned, the house is hushed, while the frail body fights for life. A sip of champagne, an iced grape, perhaps a spoonful of caviar. Only when there is no chance of red in the nose does she emerge again stronger than ever. And when she's old, she becomes the matriarch. Consider the ancient Chinese. Did little Peach Leaf, with her bound feet and embroidered silk, suddenly gain a few characters when she became the ruler of 50 courtyards? Of course not. She merely used a different aspect of the same carefully acquired power. And, as you well know, there is the power which comes from people sharing love with you, and power levied through compulsive affection. There are, of course, male Tweeties too, who use their charm to get their own way. In the last analysis, a lonely role, but never underrate its effectiveness. It appears an expensive profession. Can one tweet with a saucepan in one hand and a nappy in the other? There are degrees, as in all things, but she has the basic principle remains clear. The art consists in being apparently helpless, while successfully demanding more attention than your merit deserves. To rise to the top of her class is just as hard work as any other road to outstanding success. But how do they get away with it, and why is the species so rare? France has a tradition which allows them to flourish, and they are an essential part of her culture. Fontainebleau or Versailles would not have been built if the king had not had to compete against his women. The Englishman requires his wife to be an equal, and is embarrassed when he finds himself flattered by the Tweety approach. The American woman is too busy switching from hobby socks to mom, seriously, to tweet. Judging by the advertisements in their magazines, she is either riddled with an anxiety that he will succumb to malnutrition, or else is trying to make herself attractive by overcoming natural disadvantages she hasn't really got. It is impossible that she really needs so many deodorants, such complicated brassieres, so many lipsticks, and can hope for glamour only through perfume. She starts with a defeatist view, which drives her to lose with his weapons instead to win with her own. Then why don't I tweet? Consider last night when we walked for 3 hours for no reason. What of it? Could I do less when you said I could never keep up with you? Did you flinch when it started to rain? Did you ask me to find you a taxi or even dive into the metro? If I had had any sense, I'd have pretended to sprain my ankle so that you'd have to carry me. He laughed. That you walked as fast and as far as I did, and wouldn't give in is one of the reasons I love you. Through the curved glass of the window we fondly retraced part of the course we had run, for reasons so trivial that neither of us could really remember them. It started somewhere south of Luxembourg Gardens. We had walked there looking for a place to dine. We had peered into several and failed to agree. Charles was swinging the heavy commando torch, which he usually carried, and it hit me on the knee. I yelped, but he took no notice that I made a small fuss. I'm sorry, he said without a trace of apology, but I'm not impressed by a psychological protest which demonstrates that to get your own way you are prepared to suffer mild, very mild physical discomfort. You wish to stop at the next restaurant. I'm determined to eat with some enjoyment. You can eat where you like. Probably if you try hard enough you can find a place where they serve nothing but Irish potatoes, a gastronome's heaven. You would undoubtedly seize on the nearest dish of garlic in the hope of making me feel guilty when you poisoned yourself. I stalked on, but he progressed even faster. We reached the river and suddenly forgot to be disagreeable. Hand in hand, we walked along the quays, leaning over bridges to watch the procession of lights, following dark steps by the water's edge to find that the trees on the far bank looked as though their trunks were made of white velvet. Ahead of us, a barge was the background of an angry crowd. Charles wanted to turn his torch onto them as a spotlight. I thought they might be annoyed and he'd find himself involved in a fight. Knowing that I have not the temperament to stand by idly wringing my hands, I should probably get involved and be the only casualty. I may have protested too vigorously, for I was told to stop being governessy or to go home alone. This convinced me that all I had done was to save Charles from hideous injury and receive an unwarranted snub. A fine Irish row developed, which Charles, walking so fast that I had to run to keep up with him. Over his shoulders he made sarcastic remarks about being followed by undesirable females, while I suggested that he was far too old to behave like a child. By the time we had passed through the Tuileries Gardens, we were amicable again. It was too late for dinner, but supper? Piet Noir was in splendid form. In that district there must be dozens of restaurants, yet we found none. Another hour passed, and again we began to argue. We must have a definite objective. We wanted to find a new restaurant so that barred any familiar haunts. I said I had seen one with a red awning near the Madeleine. Charles said he knew which I meant, but it was near the Étoile and had blue shutters. I finished this here.